An entire world is ready for you to start your career teaching the path to wellness.
Mastering the science of mindfulness.
And the art of coaching.
To help clients achieve mental, emotional, and physical betterment of life.
Through movement,
nutrition,
recovery, and regeneration.
Because impacting one person impacts a family.
Impacting a family impacts a community.
And impacting a community impacts the world.
Become an NASM certified wellness coach.
Well, hello there, listener, and welcome to Better Than Fine. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall, and today I'm going to kick off the episode doing something I haven't done before on the show. I'm going to call myself in a little bit. And if you're not familiar with that term, you've probably heard of calling people out. It happens every day on Twitter. If you're not really sure, go look at some trolls. It's pretty obvious when we're calling someone out, you're like telling them they're wrong and maybe shaming them a little bit. But when we call someone in, it's an invitation to think about things that they maybe haven't had to consider before. And oftentimes that calling in is meant to be an invitation of open-heartedness and open-mindedness to have a conversation that grows that person a little bit. And I'm starting off today by calling myself in because before I'd met today's guest, I'd never met a Black Pilates instructor before. And that in itself isn't the thing. The thing is, I'd never thought about it before. And to me, the fact that I'd never had to think about it before is the nature of privilege. And that's a big word for a lot of people. They react to it really strongly. It's not meant to be like that. It's meant to be a calling in, an invitation to myself to be like, hey, you spent a decade in the fitness industry. You spent how long in the wellness space, and you never had to think about the diversity of the practitioners around you, right? Like that is a privilege that I've had as someone in the space and as a consumer in the space. So maybe it doesn't sound like a big deal to you at first, but think about this. If you're a fan of the show, if you've been in fitness or wellness and consuming those industries, how often do you get to learn from people who are like you, people who look like you, they have similar educations to you, they feel like you in a variety of ways? And what would it take for you to reach beyond that similarity to someone who wasn't like you and maybe even didn't feel like you were welcome in that space? We're all learning and growing in environments that subtly and unconsciously tell us what is or isn't for us. And in wellness, specifically, that means it's dictating how we take care of ourselves and what we think is going to be the right thing to help us have a better life, which is why I've invited today's guest to join me. So today's guest is Tasha Edwards. She is a personal trainer, a group fitness instructor many times over, board certified as a health and wellness coach. She's got a master's degree in counseling. She uses all of that background, her background in sociology, psychology, to fuel her passion to make a difference by making all of these tools accessible and expanding access and inclusion, which is why I've asked her to join me today. Tasha, welcome to Better Than Fine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I was like, oh, she's talking about me. Like, I sound pretty awesome.
You are pretty awesome. I find you very awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing with me as you have, and we prep for the show. But please, for the listener, can you share with us a bit about your journey into this wellness space, how you got here, and the way that story fuels your passion for fitness and wellness?
It's such a multi-level story. I actually got into health and wellness because I went from being a single parent of one kid to moving to another city after getting remarried and then having another kid. Then I was a stay-at-home mom. And I was studying massage therapy because I wanted to do something. I had been running a nutrition education program for one of the local universities, and I got in a car accident. And with two small kids, my husband had to come home to help me. And so on day 2, he's an engineer. They were like, "We're sorry your wife is injured. You're fired."
Oh. Oh.
So yeah, so we ended up losing our house, having to file bankruptcy. And so we moved to Alabama because he's from here and his cousin had a company. He had a job offer. And I took a job at the gym selling memberships. I took my master's degree and went and made $5.15 an hour because I wanted to finish losing my baby weight, and why not work at a gym? And that's really how it started, technically. But when I think about my path, it was like it was just another step. Like it was always meant to be that way. You know, it's like started from the bottom, now we're here. Like that's how it that's how it went. Once I got in that position and I was able to look behind me, in front of me, I was like, okay, I was born to do this.
You felt that sense of calling, right? And I know so many
Yeah.
people who like join the gym so I could have, I'm going to work at the gym, get the free membership, and then have that moment of being called into the work. Do you want to
Mhm.
speak a little bit about what that
Mhm.
felt like for you?
Yeah, it was just like a culmination of my life. So I grew up in a housing project in Chicago. And so, thoughts of knowing what it was like to go to the health department, neighborhood clinic, and knowing that my family had all of these issues and medical challenges. And so, but when I was 9, I couldn't afford to. My parents couldn't afford to send me to dance lessons, and so I watched a lot of Soul Train and stuff like that. And I created, when I was 9, I created my own dance team. I picked the music, I picked the choreography. I asked our leaders at the Boys and Girls Club to buy uniforms where we were able to be in the Bud Billiken parade in Chicago. And it was like I always had this sense of teaching, but I was always, I don't want to use the word deficit, but it was like I was always the underprivileged one. And so a
Mm.
lot of times those skills didn't translate to people who had more than me because they had no reason to listen to me, And so my friend's grandma told me one day, we're in the car, like I was in my 20s. I still remember where we were driving when she said it. And she said, "You were meant to be a teacher." And I started laughing because I was like, I don't do kids, because in my mind, that's what teacher means. And I spent a year in divinity school. I worked at a herbs and vitamin store after my husband lost his job, and so when I thought about all of that, on top of the counseling degree, on top of the family history, and knowing what we were up against, it was like one day, like, boom, these people aren't getting what they need. And selling them a membership is not the answer to their problem. I can do more. That's how
Yeah, I
it started.
hear so much alignment in what you're describing, right? This background of giving information, leading, right? Like I hear your bio and I hear leader in the space, right? Here's somebody who has had every opportunity to make a different choice, but those choices have led you into a place that you are leading others,
Hmm.
but didn't have a good label for it until, whatever divine forces put you in the
Yeah,
space that you felt things click into place.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And even then, it was like um, flying blindly. I worked at the desk. It wasn't like the fitness instructor necessarily stopped and and talked to me and befriended me. I didn't know any fitness instructors, and I kind of fumbled. I mean, fumbled my way through, and not seen as legitimate, or whatever legitimate means, because what legitimate meant was I had the money to pay for the expensive certifications and the cute clothes, and that was what legitimate meant back then.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Well, speaking of legitimate, listener, you are listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm your host, Darlene Marshall. My guest is Tasha Edwards. And if you need any dedication to her legitimacy, 2 decades of experience in the fitness and wellness space. She's got over 30 certifications, so certainly found her way there. But what we're talking about right now is being in the fitness space. You had talked about what these people need is not necessarily memberships. They need so many more things. And you were talking about your own experience of growing up in Chicago, having to go to the public clinic, not necessarily having access to health services, definitely not having a fancy gym membership.
Right.
But I think it leads me into this, kind of what we're here to talk about, which is diversity in the wellness space. I'm going to call it out. Most practitioners and most consumers of wellness content are white women in their middle age. And I should say white cis women in their middle age, which is not necessarily the best use of all of the information in wellness. Do you want to speak to why does that matter in your mind?
It matters. I'm about to go very Chicago on you.
Oh, go all the way.
So I'm a fan of Good Times, the TV show in the 70s. And James Evans has a quote that said, if you ain't been where I've been, how can you understand or tell me where I'm going? You know what I'm saying? So it is we teach what we know. And because that space has been dominated by a certain group, not just white cis women, but also thin, and so and wellness, until recently, we're getting better, but wellness was like for the privilege, like when you're thinking about survival, thriving is not on your list. Like you don't have time to sit down and read, the next self-help book because you're trying to help better your circumstances in everyday life. You don't have time to read about someone else's story who hasn't been where you are, or someone who had a trust fund and was able to start a business as opposed to starting from nothing, not knowing enough, being seen as different, and still trying to create something because there are people just like you who are waiting for you to show up in the space so that they can identify themselves in the space, and so the important
and be led by you.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because it makes a difference. When we're coming into something new, as personal trainers, group fitness instructors, health coaches, people trust us. And if you are used to not seeing anyone who looks like you, you're suspect. There's a certain level of trust that when a Black woman or someone in a larger body comes in and they catch eye contact with me, it's like this silent understanding, like an exhale, really. Like,
I'm safe
oh my
here.
God. Yeah, exactly. Because as Jessica Vann, she does a lot of DEI work, but she says a safe place, it's not a location, it's a feeling. And so we've taken that term and just like tossed it around like Play-Doh, like we can make this a safe space. No, not if your whole idea behind that is aesthetics and making sure everybody has on t-shirts instead of a tank top. It's a feeling. It's about the culture that you create, and it can feel scary when you have to be the first, which I have been in a lot of more situations than I would have liked to. But you can't speak to my experience based on something you read in a book. Like Good Times isn't even real, but people ask me all the time, did you grow up in the projects that are on Good Times? And I have to say, Good Times was filmed in Hollywood. It was filmed in Hollywood, and if you haven't had to deal with that, and just to go like real deep, like real quick, I'm about to take a squirrel. When George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd happened, that's like, we blew up. And the point that I made that made not just about wellness, but in general, that made so many people in my space go, was I said, have you ever had to talk to your teenage son about what to do if he gets pulled over by the police.
Yep.
And that, like, I was like, we're not the same. I don't see color. Well, I wish you would, because then if you saw color, you would understand that there's a different set of circumstances, a different culture, a different history, different background, different priorities, different starts in life in this country. If you saw that, then you would respect that instead of saying we're equal, because then you tend to believe that I should be well and I have access to vitamins and all this kind of stuff because you do.
Yeah. And how could I, as a practitioner, not understanding any of that nuance, sit here and tell you what you're going to eat, what your meditation practice should be, what time you should be going to sleep? If you're off worried about your son or your cousin or whomever, I'm not going to have an understanding of that information. So maybe I can make the container, but that container may not feel safe, to your point.
Exactly. But that holding space is really what the health coaching aspect is about, because that's how we learn. You know, everyone wants a reading resource list. The best way to learn is to have conversations with the people who are in spaces with you, you know, and as opposed to feeling like you're going to be wrong and not asking, it's still a privilege to say, well, I'm not going to even discuss it because I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to offend anyone. No, sometimes, like, showing your ignorance and saying, I really don't understand, you know, that's stepping out of that privilege. You have the privilege to turn your back and not have it affect you for the rest of your life, you know, or there's a privilege in sitting in the house, ordering 20 books on Kindle and reading about it, but still not having any interaction with anyone who's different than you.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, or
it's
the privilege
crazy.
of, I'm so sorry to have spoken over you. Please continue.
No, go ahead.
I was
No.
going to say the privilege of just being able to, oh, I want to be a health coach now. I'm going to
Oh
go
gosh.
buy that cert. I want to be a corrective exercise specialist. I'm going to go buy that cert. And to, oh, I can't afford the cert and my rent. I'm going to just ask my parents for help. You know, there's layers and layers, or maybe it's not even your parents. Maybe it's just that you could get a credit card or whatever that would then allow a practitioner to have access to the information, the certification, the hiring, you know, all of the different layers that then create the industry that are barriers for entry for diversity.
Yeah. So I will tell you, you know, body wisdom, the body keeps score.
Yeah.
Like that, like, hit me in my gut so deep, because that was part of my barrier. You know, like when I started teaching yoga, Fit Tour was doing like a $99 certification. It was all I could afford. And I was not seen as legitimized because I did not have the money to take off and fly to Costa Rica and stay there for 3 weeks
Or
on top of
Bali.
doing it. Yeah, I didn't have it. You know, like how I got my books was that I became an eBay junkie. And so I would buy everything I could. A lot of times the books were 1 cent, you know, or whatever. We didn't have all the resources that we have right now. And actually, that's how I met Kelly McGonigal, because Kelly McGonigal was doing, this was before she was Dr. Kelly. She was doing like this online like forum or whatever for people who were learning yoga or whatever. And that's how I met her, because I was so desperate for resources, you know. And now looking at, there was a meditation certification. I have two, but sometimes we do get caught up in that legitimate, which one. That certification was 10 G's, you know. And I have been told by, like, when I went to Institute of Integrative Nutrition over a decade ago, there was a girl who wanted to sell me this package. Every health coach needs a health coach. You're right, unless you're not making money. But her sessions were like, and this is 2010, 2011, they were $350 an hour.
Ooh.
And her suggestion to me was to defer my car note.
Yeah, just defer on your debt. You're fine. Your health is more
Yeah.
important. Oof.
Yeah.
That's some entitlement right there.
Yes.
Listener, you are listening to Better Than Fine. My guest is Tasha Edwards. We are talking about diversity in the wellness space. And Tasha is the executive director of See Her Healthy. It's a nonprofit that brings access to resources that support women's health regardless of their situation, as we dive into a variety of situations. And, what we're talking about here, this entitlement and privilege piece, what I'm hearing is someone who, in this example, wasn't actually holding the container for you to explore what's going to be best for you. But the other thing that I hear as you described, like, okay, you already have 2 meditation certifications, but the feeling for a third. I think the other thing that often comes up when we have that feeling as a practitioner that we're not legit enough, right? Like as somebody with a chronic illness who is in a plus size body, I have often had the feeling like I don't look like a fitness professional. I don't look like a wellness professional. And that creates in me this feeling of imposter syndrome. Like I'm not good enough because I'm a big girl. And I know for me, that meant that I hunted more certs. Do you see that happening as well as a way to force legitimacy? Like, look, I'm in this space. I've got all these letters next to my name. It proves that I belong here, as opposed to somebody who just looks really good on the gram.
Yeah, and there's an extra layer to that, because when you're Black, you're raised to say, like, you always have to be 3 or 4 times as good to even be seen as equal. And so it was always that work harder, because it was easy to overlook me because I didn't fit the stereotype of who was in wellness. And so I spent my entire life in magnet schools. And so that's what you learn. You do the most, you do the most, you do the most. And in order to be seen in this space, it wasn't enough for me to say, I'm going to go teach yoga, because they didn't want me to teach yoga anyway. And yoga teachers that I didn't even know in the city hated me because I wasn't legitimate. Well, in order for the Black girl who's now on staff to be legitimate, that means I don't have to learn how to teach yoga. I need to teach yoga, Pilates, step, kickboxing, take her turbo kick. Then I need to learn Zumba. I need to do body pump, body jam. And that's really how it started, because it was like, if someone found a way to deny me, I always had like another rabbit to pull out of the hat. I'm like, oh, you don't need another body pump teacher, but I teach step, and it was like, I don't teach hip hop. Like, by the way, I don't teach hip hop. I got that all the time. I teach dance, but I don't teach hip hop.
That expectation stereotyped of like, oh, you're the Black group fitness instructor. You do hip hop.
Of course you teach hip hop.
Of course you do.
And
I roll.
No. Yeah, it's crazy. And I find that there are a lot of white women who have come into my space that they were attached to me, but it wasn't like personal. They were attached to me. It was like they wanted to deal with their guilt by saying they were my friend. Like wanting to spend hours talking to me about their story, about the racism that I'm facing. The gaslighting thing, but they would spend hours. It was like inboxes, and they're calling me, and they want to be my friend, because if I'm your friend, then I can't be racist. And you're telling me all the reasons why you can't be racist. You haven't done any work. You haven't heard anything that I've said. You haven't asked the hard questions so that we can have the hard conversations. And so that part of it, not only dealing with what was already happening with the industry and then what blew up in our face, but also the heaviness of feeling like people wanted me to hold their stuff.
Yeah.
And
here, hold my bag of guilt.
Yeah, exactly. And so how a lot of people found me was that I'm pretty consistent. I have about 8,000 Instagram posts. I've been consistent, but my conversation about racism and larger bodies and ageism kind of just went out the window. And when they did Blackout Tuesday, I believe this was June 2nd of 2020, and everybody was going to go silent, right? And there was this combined movement or whatever. And until about 11 o'clock that morning, I was fine. I posted my little square and I was with it. And I went to get lunch. Darlene, I went to get lunch. And I was sitting in the car and I said, if I don't speak when people are listening, then this whole thing doesn't make sense. I sat in the car. It's burning up outside. I have no air on. And I go on this 6.5-minute rant. I just lose it, and I was like, all the stuff I've had to deal with. I wasn't Black enough. I was too Black. I was too Black to teach Zumba. I was too Chicago to teach yoga. I was too, being called the N-word at work by supervisors who didn't know that I knew. And it was like, I let it all fly out. And I am like pouring down sweat. I turn the video off. I take my salad and go home. And my Instagram, I had been gaining and losing the same 50 followers for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And I know my Instagram was picking up so fast that Instagram thought I was a bot. Like they would shut me down and I couldn't follow people back. But I hate that it took that. But also it was a platform to, I'm not confrontational in general. I like to disarm people first, so then you can hear what I'm saying. I don't fight fire with fire. I mean, I can. That's the Chicago in me. I can. But I feel like in order for someone to hear me, I have to say, I want a safe space, but I also want you to feel like you have a safe space and that this is not the space for me to attack you and belittle you. What I'm doing is setting up the conversation. Are you ready to hear the hard stuff in a loving way? And I was criticized for that too.
Well, certainly not here. That was the whole point of the calling in, and I hope the listener also feels called in. Right? We're opening this can of worms because we want to invite you, the listener, and one another to be reflective about how do we make it better? How do we bring more awareness so that, in my mind, coming from the positive psychology space, it's about well-being. Like I want to embrace the vision that well-being can become a human right and well-being for all. And that means recognizing where we're getting in our own way of our best intentions. So you're listening to the Better Than Fine podcast. I'm Darlene Marshall. We are talking about diversity in the wellness space. And my guest is Tasha Edwards. She also hosts the See Her Healthy podcast. I'm going to take a little left turn. Because one of the things that we had talked about before, and you kind of hinted at it a second ago when you were talking about, I think you said like you're too Chicago for yoga, which is just like, that's a good turn of phrase. But one of the things that we had talked about was in your yoga teaching and in your Pilates education, that there's certain ways that we're instructed to move the body because those traditions are made, if we're going far enough back, those traditions are, white dancers or young Indian men. But now they're being applied to different shapes and sizes of bodies and different life conditions. And you shared with me some of the criticism that you've received. Do you mind speaking a bit to that? I mean, I think you know what I'm getting at, but can you talk a little bit about what that was and what that looks like?
I get criticized every day for it. And so one of the things specifically, so yoga has become a little more evolved, I'm going to say. Now, again, it's still like gang wars. Ashtanga people don't fool with Vinyasa. Vinyasa people don't believe the Iyengar way. And so it's
well, the Iyengar over here, we're like, we're ready to throw down.
Yeah, it's still gang wars. But Pilates specifically, and this is because I've spent probably the majority of the last 2 years in the Pilates space when I didn't know there were gang wars in Pilates too. There was classic versus contemporary. And so the structure, if you look at the fact that Joseph Pilates brought Pilates to the United States, 1923, 1924, that's almost 100 years. And the idea that people think that we should still do things exactly as he did blows my mind. Why? I'm not saying they shouldn't for them, but here's this short German guy with no butt. Exercises on his body don't look like they look on mine. And also, if you think the evolution of the human, there was no Netflix and cell phones, where we were all like this all the time. And a lot of dancers used it for rehab. But there came a point that because Pilates felt very underground, people enjoy the exclusivity of that. Just like with yoga. So I started teaching yoga and Pilates in the gym, which means anybody could come in. So I was always that way. I had a struggle teaching in the studio because of the way people acted when they came in the studio, as if I owed them something extra because it was called the yoga studio. And so as we move through bodies changing, the people use the term obesity. It's a term that I really dislike. But as we're getting, the whole COVID body, these are terms that we have kind of like thrown on ourselves. And now at 40, I just turned 47 last week. And
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I'm in menopause. And I'm like, if you tell me to pull my knees to my chest, honey, there is extra skin down there that is not moving. I feel like I'm suffocating. There has to be another way, And so I think so many of us are afraid to move away from what we know. Like, we know this is true because it's in this book, but we don't trust our own intuition. We don't trust our backgrounds and our experiences and our social knowledge,
Or we're not trusting our clients and our students, right? When our client or our student says, this doesn't feel good for my body, we're trying to bootstrap them to something we've been indoctrinated in instead of respecting their autonomy, their feedback. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about your butt and your belly or we're talking about your car payment when we're in a sales conversation, right? Either way, I'm disrespecting your situation by projecting my nonsense into it.
Because that's how we make money, because
it have to be that way.
It's like, if we came from the health coaching perspective, that clients are whole and resourceful all on their own, period. Yeah. But we make money from telling people they are broken and you're broken and I can fix it. And if you just pay me these 6 payments of $29.99, then I'll send you my 5-page ebook and all of a sudden you're cured. Well, there was nothing wrong with you to begin with. So it's not, I am not discrediting money. Money is just energy and you should be compensated for your work. But it's the way that we talk about it, because in order for something to be wrong, it means that we have deemed that something is right instead of just what is. If you're wrong, I have to make myself right, or I have to make you, if you have one, you have to have the other. But who gets to decide what is what? Exactly. Who gets to decide what is right and what is wrong, as opposed to being what is, learning how to keep your mouth closed and take the lead from the client. The client knows internally, this is giving me a headache. I'm dizzy. Instead of us saying, well, you probably didn't eat. You probably need ginger. You probably didn't eat this. I have this in
roll
my
your thoracic spine.
Yeah, exactly. It's your, it's your 4th vertebra. And I think what's happening is your psoas is tight. And then if your hip, your pelvis is upside down and you're like, what?
What?
Oh, I said it hurt. Now get me out of this.
Yeah. Can I just not pull my knee to my chest? Because that would be great. Well, and I think
we see that as a deficit, or we see it as lack of discipline. Like, you can't do it because you aren't working hard enough. No, I can't do it because my boobs and belly
says no.
And I can't.
Or flip that the other way, we see it as a practitioner as I need to reinforce my authority, my knowledge, my whatever ego-driven thing to prove I've got all the information. So you tell me this hurts, I'm going to go, oh, you got to fix the impingement of the left, whatever the knuckle, instead of just like, oh, then don't do that.
Yeah, but it's hard to not do that because we want to, when you go back, circling back to what you said, imposter syndrome. I want to believe I'm earning my money, which means if you say something to me, then in order to legitimize myself, I have to have an answer, even if I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yep. Yeah. Instead of just owning and holding space.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're listening to Better Than Fine. I'm Darlene Marshall. We are talking about diversity in the wellness space. My guest is Tasha Edwards. And, Tasha, we've unpacked a lot of the challenges, right? We've talked about privilege. We talked about calling in. We've talked about some of the, discrimination and just ugly underbelly that you personally have experienced as what to me feels like a story of leading the way when you saw a need from your own lived experience. And, I want to leave our listeners with something useful to them other than just us, sketching the problem that we both see and that you experience directly. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, yeah, I live this, I want to be better, I want to be healthy, I want to be stronger. What is that person? What would you invite them into, or what would you want them to know?
Childlike wonder. And that is when I talk to people and they're like, I haven't moved, I don't know what to do. My first question is, when you were young, what did you like to do? And to watch people's face light up when they talk about sliding down, the sliding board, or skating, or double dutch, which is was my thing, or I'd probably break my neck now. You probably would, but to then find activities, if I'm working in a movement space, to find activities that resemble what it was that used to give them joy. Because we have taken the joy out of movement.
Oh, yeah.
Period. And so when people find joy and there aren't rules around it, they're more likely to grow and not even realize that they're working. The other thing is, I highly recommend therapy. And I do realize that therapy is a privilege. So I'm going to say this other thing is that all of us need someone that we can trust, because we have been walking around with all of this on us so much. And squats are amazing if you can get out of the bed to do them. If you are extremely depressed and you don't know your way, a squat or a kale salad recipe is not going to help you. Yeah. And so it is to feel like that it is okay to ask for help. It is okay to share with someone you trust that you are struggling, because once you can get it out, you can take that energy and put it into something else. I'm not saying you need to go sign up at the Pilates studio, because that may not be your answer. It may be go outside and blow bubbles. Something as simple as, what's going to get me out of the bed? What am I living for right now? Why is it worth it for me to fight back? Even if it's not a, Taibo punch, it might be a pebbles and bam bam small movement, but it's these small steps that are taking us to bigger steps. But we want to see the whole, as Martin Luther King said, you don't have to see the whole staircase. That's faith. Is to take that one small step, and one small step consistently, regardless of what it is, builds up. But when you find out, when you realize, I have something to live for, I have something to give to the world, I have children and grandchildren, parents, grandparents that I want to live for and be my best, I want to break the generational curse over my family. You may not know what to do, but what you'll do is figure out how to get up. And once you get up, then we can start from there.
Oh, beautifully unpacked. Beautifully unpacked. There is one thing that I had really wanted to cover in today's episode. We'll have to have you back on to talk about it, but we didn't get to talk about social determinants. And as you were sharing that, your thoughts there, and you mentioned, the kale salad and squats don't matter if you can't get out of bed. They also don't matter if you don't have a grocery store that has kale, or you don't have a gym nearby, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So starting where you are is internal, about like, okay, what I actually need is the reason to get up. And it is also external with like, what resources do I have right now and what can I do with them, instead of trying to do some optimized perfect thing. Which I want to flip this question one more degree, which is, okay, if we're speaking there to the person who hears themselves as the receiver in the conversation, what about the person who sees themselves as the privileged in the conversation? What would you want the listener who it is the thing we are talking about, right? The person who is holding keys, the person who can have all the search they want. How do we as an industry move forward in a thoughtful and open-hearted way?
Shift resources without feeling like you need to be deemed as savior to do it. There are people who are sitting on resources, and I will tell you, I work with someone And they were like, yeah, we have a scholarship, but you have to work so many hours because, we're basically not giving you something for free. Then it's not a scholarship, it's work study, And here's the thing, if you're doing an online class or certification, it's not hurting you to have one other person in there.
Yeah.
People need to put their money where their mouth is. The first thing we need is resources. We don't need a lot of conversations. Forget your Instagram posts. I don't care if you ever get on social media again. Do the groundwork. Find out where the need is and get there, because there's enough needs that no one needs to be able to say, I don't know where to go. Donate money if you don't have the time. Donate services if you don't have anything to quote unquote give. You have equipment, get equipment to people. You have little fitness stuff over here you're not using, get it. You have some workout clothes, get it. Whatever you need to get to people. Stop talking, start doing, without expecting anything like, someone to like your post because you took a picture of you giving water to a homeless person, like that sort of thing.
No. Yeah. Tangible, actionable, that isn't about glorifying the self.
Yeah. Let's get moving.
I dig it. Tasha, where could people find you if they are feeling inspired in this moment?
I am a self-proclaimed Instagram junkie, which is probably where I am the most. And my Instagram is hip healthy chick, HIPHEALTHY, chick with a K, CHICK. And my website, which as soon as I stop all this traveling, Darlene, I'm going to really get back to it. But my website is Tasha
Your website's
Edwards.
Great.
Girl, TashaEdwards.com. And you can kind of just find me in different places from there. But I answer my own inbox. So if you inbox me, you're talking to me, and my thing is, no, I can't have 3-hour conversations with everyone about their guilt, but tell me you're connected with me. Tell me, hey, this is what we're doing. I want to know that you're there so we can learn from each other.
Yeah. That's why I follow you. I've already learned from you. I follow her too.
Yeah.
Jump on with me. If you have reactions to this episode, we want to hear from you. So you can DM Tasha. You could also DM me. I'm Darlene.coach on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you are digging this episode, you want to like, comment, share it. You could also subscribe on whatever platform you happen to be listening to. Or if you want to support the show, you could leave us a review. That would be awesome. But Tasha, thank you so much for being on Better Than Fine. It's been a delight to have you, and I appreciate your vulnerability and your open-heartedness.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm here for the conversations.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have you back to talk about social reference at some point, but we're going to leave it there.
For sure.
And thanks